It's Tuesday, May 6th. It's about 5:30 p.m. West Coast time. I was going to take today off from TikTok social media, but I forgot that, I thought I was going to sneeze. There was one thing that happened that I wanted to talk about. The United States Supreme Court heard a case out of Oklahoma on charter schools, which could very well have the effect of effectively ending the separation between church and state. And I found a really good article in it that included a lot of the context that I wanted to talk about, and that did that homework for me. This is an article from yesterday's New Yorker website, written by Ruth Marcus. It's titled, "Is This the End of Separation of Church and State? The Supreme Court justices who have steadily eroded prohibitions on government sponsorship of religious schools now seem ready to do away with those prohibitions entirely." So, some things to understand. So the beginning of the end of the separation of church and state started with recycled tires. Specifically for the playground of a Missouri church's preschool that was going to be, it needed to be resurfaced. Some people wanted to do that with state funds. There was a lawsuit. The Supreme Court ended up permitting that. And essentially they were just like, it's just a playground. They would do that for public schools with public funds. So it's just surfacing a playground. It's not, slippery sloping, chipping away at the separation of church and state if we allow this church to have a new playground surface for their preschool. And the end of separation of church and state could happen by the end of next month in the form of a Supreme Court ruling requiring Oklahoma to fund the nation's first religious charter school, a Catholic institution that is, quote, faithful to the teachings of Jesus Christ, close quote. So we're going to talk about the First Amendment because it contains the Establishment Clause, whereby the government will not establish any official religion of the government for the state. And it also contains the Free Exercise Clause, where the government does nothing to prevent the free exercise of religion, and the conflict between those two clauses that are within the same sentence. The First Amendment is one sentence long. The Constitution provides that the government, quote, shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, close quote. The Establishment Clause, the Free Exercise Clause. The court has said the two religion clauses are intended to facilitate religious practice without sponsorship, the Establishment Clause, and without interference from the government, the free exercise component. But there are occasions, particularly when it comes to matters of government funding, when those clauses are in tension with one another. As the court has grown increasingly conservative in recent years, it has consistently resolved this conflict in favor of the Free Exercise Clause, expanding the sphere of what protecting religious liberty requires and constricting, to the point of near invisibility, the scope of what the Establishment Clause forbids. Yeah, I think that's accurate. They're expanding one and eradicating the other. And the Establishment Clause, is the separation of church and state. And they're essentially shrinking it and shrinking it and shrinking it and shrinking it until it's pretty much not a thing. Which brings us back to the tires. In 2017, the justices considered a claim by Trinity Lutheran Church of Columbia, Missouri. Its preschool daycare center had been excluded from a Missouri playground resurfacing program. The church claimed that this infringed on its religious freedom, free expression. The court ruled 7-2 for the church. Quote, The exclusion of Trinity Lutheran from a public benefit for which it is otherwise qualified solely because it is a church is odious to our Constitution. You always got to keep an eye out when they start throwing out that word odious. The court said in a decision by Chief Justice John Roberts. Justice Elena Kagan joined the majority in that case. Stephen Breyer concurred separately, emphasizing that the program was akin to providing churches with police and fire protection. Here's the part that I like. Justices Sonia Sotomayor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg dissented, and in hindsight, their warning looks prescient. It's not only playground surfaces that can be slippery. Quote, to hear the court tell it, this is a simple case about recycling tires to resurface a playground. The stakes are higher, Sotomayor wrote. This case is about nothing less than the relationship between religious institutions and the civil government, that is, between church and state. The court today profoundly changes that relationship by holding, for the first time, that the Constitution requires the government to provide public funds directly to a church. Its decision slights both our precedents and our history, and its reasoning weakens this country's long-standing commitment to separation of church and state, beneficial to both. A footnote in the Missouri ruling noted that it did not address religious uses of funding. That distinction did not last long. As Sotomayor predicted, playground padding was just the start. 3 years later, in 2020, the court ruled that a Montana tax credit program for private school tuition had to include religious schools. This time, all 4 liberal justices dissented. That was before Amy Coney Barrett joined the court. In 2022, a case from Maine, the conservative majority bolstered to 6 with the arrival of Justice Amy Coney Barrett, went even further. In parts of the state so rural that there are no public high schools, Maine pays for students to attend other public or private schools, but not sectarian ones. The court said that limitation violated the rights of parents who wanted their children to receive a religious education. Quote, what a difference 5 years makes, Sotomayor lamented in a dissent, referring to her earlier dissent. Today, the court leads us to a place where separation of church and state becomes a constitutional violation. That is one hell of a sentence. Now comes Oklahoma, where the Catholic Church created St. Isidore of Seville Catholic Virtual School, is seeking state recognition to become an explicitly religious charter school. The state's current charter school includes science and technology-focused school, a Cherokee language immersion program run by the tribe, a classical academy sponsored by conservative Hillsdale College. St. Isidore, the Catholic charter school, named for a 6th century Spanish theologian, would be something entirely different from any publicly chartered, publicly funded school that has come before, anywhere in the United States. According to a proposed curriculum guide, kindergartners would be taught that they can communicate with God through prayer. First graders would be instructed on the Mass and the reality of sin. That is indoctrinating children. Because if you're telling 6-year-olds about sin, you're also telling 6-year-old kids about hell. And you are telling 6-year-old children that if they sin, they could burn in hell for all eternity at 6 years old. That's fucking gross and child abuse. But I digress. The teachings of Jesus Christ as set by the Catechism of the Catholic Church would permeate the school day, braided through the secular curriculum. Introductory high school science would reveal God's orderly creation of the universe. Oh boy. While physiology would adopt a faith-based approach to the value of human life from the beginnings of a cell. The school would be open to all applicants, whether Catholic or not, but students would be required to attend Mass. Oklahoma's statewide charter school board granted approval to St. Isidore. And here's the kicker. But the state's Republican Attorney General, who is now running for governor, sued to block that action because even he recognizes there's a separation between church and state. Oklahoma's Republican Attorney General sued the statewide charter school board to prevent them from approving this Catholic charter school being funded with public money. The Oklahoma Supreme Court agreed with the Attorney General, agreed that allowing St. Isidore to operate as a public Catholic charter school would violate both the Establishment Clause and the state's constitutional ban on spending government funds to support religious institutions. That's wild. Republican Attorney General, Republican Supreme Court struck down the state school charter board establishing a Catholic charter school that would be funded with public money. That's just wild. Things may be trending in a different direction at the United States Supreme Court. Judging by the oral arguments held before the justices on last Wednesday. So I should mention, before I forget, Amy Coney Barrett recused herself from this case because she's very close friends with someone who is in some way involved with this school. She didn't say that publicly. She just recused and didn't give a statement. But so it's an 8-member court that heard this. Theoretically, it could be a 4-4 tie. But all 5 of the conservative men on the court during the hearing telegraphed pretty freaking hard that they're going to side with the school against Republicans Attorney General, or Oklahoma's Republican Attorney General, and against the Oklahoma Republican Supreme Court. Lawyers for St. Isidore and the Charter School Board argued that refusing to open the charter school program to religious schools violates the Free Exercise Clause. They described the school as a private institution simply seeking access to a program available to all but those with religious affiliations. Well, all of those other organizations aren't subject to a separation of church and state, which is in the Constitution. It's in the First Amendment because it's religion. Hey. No families are forced to subject themselves to its curriculum. They are given a choice among various schools. On the other side, Gregory Garre, Garre, who served as George W. Bush's Solicitor General and is representing the plaintiffs in the case, contended that charter schools are public schools and that teaching religion as truth in public schools has long been impermissible under the Establishment Clause. So again, they're arguing the Free Exercise Clause. People who are against it are arguing the Establishment Clause. Those two things are separated in the First Amendment by a comma. Even as St. Isidore complained of being singled out for unfavorable treatment because of its religious status, Gregory Garre noted that the school was asserting that it deserved an exemption from ordinary rules that require charter schools to agree not to discriminate in hiring LGBTQ people. The school said instead that it, quote, complies with all applicable state and federal laws and statutes to the extent the teachings of the Catholic Church allow. So they're not going to hire anybody from the LGBTQ community, but presumably child sex offenders are free to apply. Right? I mean, let's be honest here. Let's see. So if for some reason it is a 4-4 tie, then the Oklahoma State Supreme Court ruling would stand, and they don't get to be a charter school. But in its brief, the Trump administration filed a brief in the case supporting the school and the school itself in its brief said, hey, you know, we've got this recent change in the administration. It's Trump now. It's not Biden anymore. As though that should matter when it comes to the First Amendment. Anyway, it's especially disturbing that the government kind of flipped on this, because the new stance they're taking in supporting this school conflicts with a 1994 federal law that established support for charter schools, which requires that charter schools be non-religious in its programs, admissions policies, employment practices, and all other operations, which a Catholic charter school clearly is not going to be. You know, to the extent that opponents of religious charter schools have any hope of success, their only hope is Chief Justice John Roberts. The other four guys are like, hell yeah, this is totally fine. Screw that separation of church and state. Kavanaugh, during his questioning, was essentially literally saying this is not a big deal. This is not a big deal at all. Why should religious charter schools be treated differently than other charter schools? He was this close. He was this close. Because they're religious, Brett. So, so what happens? What happens if the Supreme Court, if a majority of the Supreme Court sides with this school? It will then become constitutional for states to use public taxpayer money to fund religious charter schools. There are something like 47 states that have charter school laws which prohibit charter schools from being religious schools. All 47 of those laws would immediately become unconstitutional and unenforceable. I mean, the floodgates would open. The floodgates would open. And then it's like you'd be left dealing with stuff like, what happens when a charter school claims its religious beliefs allow it to educate only members of its faith? Or if a religious charter school claims that its religious beliefs only allow it to educate boys and permits it to expel LGBTQ students or students who have LGBTQ parents. What if, as Sotomayor asked, a school wants to teach creationism, not evolution? What if, as Kagan asked, a Hasidic community wants its charter school to be free to teach Talmud without having to comply with curriculum requirements imposed on other charters? Will mainstream religions inevitably benefit at the expense of sects with fringier views? I mean, what happens if you get a religious charter school that teaches polygamy? This case is really flying under the radar, given everything else that's going on. But the end result could effectively be the end of the separation of church and state in the United States, which has been in the Constitution for 240 years in the First Amendment. I mean, they're talking about ending the separation of church and state. And think about that. Think about that with this fucking guy as president, surrounded by people like Stephen Miller. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please click like, please leave a comment, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's free. If you're seeing this on TikTok, there's a link in the link tree in my bio for my YouTube page, which is where I usually post videos this long, but I got impatient today. So anyway, I hope everybody has an amazing week. And, you know, I guess if we're going to end the separation of church and state, then we're going to start doing things like outlawing pants for women and girls and shorts and things like that. So as a, you know, amuse bouche. Okay. Have a good week, everybody.